Ladies and gentlemen, today on The Unconventional Pastor, God, nationalism, and the military. That's right, it's an all-American favorite this week. In God we love, trust, and bust. It's going to be a blast. In just a moment on The Unconventional Pastor.
Well, good evening. My name is Bob Greaves, and they call me the Unconventional Pastor. And just spent, a tough hour here with Greg Bray. And unfortunately, because of connections, it just didn't go so well. And I'm sorry, because I was really enjoying the show, and I know he was too. But anyway, so he wants to take me to task for some of my points of view, which is precisely what he's supposed to be doing. So I'm glad to have him doing that. And I don't mind having my views scrutinized in any manner, no matter what. Anyhow, so here we are tonight. And, because of a lot of the things that have been going on in the news and a lot of the chatter that goes on Facebook and other places, we've been hearing an awful lot about what's going on in Syria, and hearing also an awful lot about, the attitudes that people have about what we're doing. And we're hearing, a lot of chatter from all sorts of sides. And I really wanted to talk about some of this chatter and to talk about some of the dynamics behind it. It's a difficult thing to do for several reasons. One is, first, excuse me, I got burp in there, but first of all, it's difficult to do because there are so many passionate opinions. And people have a hard time hearing a passionate opinion that's other than the one they have. And when they hear a passionate opinion that seems similar to somebody else's, they just assume it's the same message. And so it can be very difficult to talk about it and to be heard because of all of the narrowness that we are invited into whenever we get passionate. But the other reason why it's difficult is because I tend to take what I call a polyaxial or a multi-axial approach. And that is this, that I don't believe that a concept or a political philosophy is useful just because it's correct. You see, because I'm multi-axial. That is, I believe that there are many ideas and philosophies out there that possess a great deal of valid merit, but they also stand in juxtaposition to other competing ideas that also possess valid merit. I think I first became aware of this conundrum when I had a job once where I actually had I had a covert job. The job that I had as an official title was not my real job. I was working with a company, and I was apparently just a shipping clerk. But that was not my real job. The truth was I was investigating fraud. And, there's a lot of fraud happening in the inventory of this company. And by being a shipping clerk, I had reasons to be where I had to be looking into things, looking for what was going on. And we eventually did uncover a great deal of how the inventory was disappearing. Make a long story short, I was at that time hired as a shipping clerk that was technically company working in a union shop where, because I'm not union, there was certain things. And so I worked on the company side of things there. And then after that job had come to an end, and it did come to an end after we found out what was going on, they didn't need us anymore. So that came to an end. But I ended up going into another job after that where I was on the union side. And I was hired. That's when I got a job at GAF. and they later, unfortunately, they went out of business. But not because I was working for them either. But anyhow, so I'd had this opportunity to work on the company side, and another opportunity to work on the union side, and my opinion was that when I was working on the company side, I really felt that the union had no clue what the challenges were for the company. And when I was working on the union side, I really felt that that the union had no clue what. Well, anyway, make the long story short, I just got the impression that both of these opposing sides had no clue what the other side really had to do in terms of their responsibilities and the challenges and the things that they were most concerned about and most needful of. And as a result, it's very easy for people in a union to think they know how the company ought to be managing things, and they don't really know that. But they certainly know the impact the way the company's managing things has on them. And likewise with the company has no clue what it is that the labor is always up against and what it is they're doing. But they think they know. And so both of these sides want to be able to not only express what it is they need from their standpoint, they think they also have the philosophy that tells the other side what they need. And they don't. And so in a sense here, I would say that I experienced this as when I'm on the, I thought there was a great deal of validity with the union and what they had to say. I thought there was also a great deal of validity with the company and what the company had to say. And the fact that they're arguing with each other over it struck me as being absolutely stupid, unintelligent, because they wanted to believe that since their view was solidly correct from their standpoint in the way they see it, that the other side had to therefore be wrong. And that's not true. That's not true at all. The truth is we each come to life from various different standpoints, from various different stations in life, and we all, because of that, experience some of the aspects of our lives from a very unique standpoint. And it can make complete coherent sense to us that it would be just wonderful if everybody could do it my way. That's so immature. It's true that it would be easier for me if everybody did it my way, but I'm absolutely convinced it wouldn't be easier for them. And I'm sure that if we did everything their way, that would be difficult for me. Well, duh. We need to take a look at this and come to an understanding that there needs to be a multi-axial approach. There are ways in which we do not appreciate, understand, or properly respect the differences between where each of us come from. And we tend to grab hold of ideas, philosophies, economic beliefs, and even political beliefs that are based entirely on the notion that the world makes sense from where I'm standing. That is so small-minded, in my opinion, that it doesn't work, and I'm not surprised. So as a result, I'm not one of these people who argues that, well, the Democrats are right and the Republicans are wrong, or that, well, the Republicans are right or the Democrats. I think they're all right. I think they each have some valid concerns that they're attempting to champion. But the problem is they're all so damn narrow-minded, they can't appreciate the fact that their genuine and honest concerns and their genuine, honest consideration of it is too small to work for everybody and doesn't include other points of view that are equally valid. So it's not good enough that a person has a valid view that is truly a genuine and honest consideration of the issues from their standpoint. That's not good enough. Well, unless you enjoy being narrow-minded and right. So being multi-axial involves recognizing that the world and coherence is something that we all do cognitively as a result of reducing reality to a manageable set of axioms that we can deal with. But it's always a reduction. It's impossible for any human being, myself included, to possess a coherent view of reality without it being in some ways a misrepresenting reduction of that reality. And as a result of that, it's kind of like one of these optical illusions. That picture where when you look at it for a moment, it looks like an elderly woman looking down. And then in another moment, it looks like a young woman looking away. And it's the same picture. And yet, depending on how you catch it, it can look either way. There's also this optical illusion you may have seen. It's a moving picture. And it's some woman who's turning around and around and around. And some people look at this woman turning around and they see her rotating clockwise. Other people look at her and they see her rotating counterclockwise. And some people actually look at her, and if they look away and look back, it switches on them. And yet there's nothing going on there other than the fact that the motion is constant the same way. The truth is, reality is such a complex thing that our reduction of it is always a form of an optical illusion. And there is more than one fully and completely coherent way of making sense of it. So just because you have a way that is honest, truly coherent, and makes complete sense to you, does not mean you're the only one who is right. Does not mean you're the only one with a completely coherent. So it's a view of it. So you need to recognize, if you're going to be multi-axial, that everybody is coming from a different standpoint, and from their standpoint, that which is important, necessary, and of genuine concern and impact in their lives is going to be something very different from somebody who comes from some other place. But most people don't want to be honest enough to be that multi-axial. And so what do? We fight over it. Stupidest thing in the world we can do, but I guess we don't know better. I suppose this is why love is in so many ways a far more powerful philosophy. Because in love, we're more likely to be able to hear things that we don't usually want to hear. In love, we can begin to get outside ourselves and begin to empathize with people who are really coming from a very different standpoint, who are facing a very different reality. It's very important that we be able to do that. And so that's what brings me to this topic of, God, nationalism, and the military. I think it's a very dangerous thing to mix God in with these ideas. Because you see, it is already bad enough that as human beings, we think we're right just because our way of making sense of things really makes sense. It's bad enough that as human beings, we're too narrow-minded to realize that reality is so complex that, like an optical illusion, there are many valid ways of making sense of it. We're also too vulnerable. We are aware of what it is we stand to lose, and we're not willing to lose it unnecessarily, that it's very difficult for us to find the courage to get outside of ourselves and to realize that there is a way of making sense of life that really makes sense and doesn't work as well for me as the sense I prefer. So it's already difficult enough as human beings simply to be monoaxial, and that's our typical default view. Being polyaxial, being multiaxial is something that is rare. It doesn't happen, and my experience has been the only people I know who seem to be functioning at a multiaxial approach are people who are either very intelligent or have had this modeled for them by other people who seem to be truly well balanced. And so seeing it modeled, they learned to adopt it. It's similar in child development in terms of something that is often called causality. Every child who grows up begins to discover very early on this relationship called causality. Oh, they don't articulate it as such. But, for example, the baby who discovers that by crying when they're hungry, that mom shows up to feed them, discovers that there is this connection between being hungry and crying, and there's also a connection between crying and mommy showing up. And as a result, these babies therefore learn from that causality relationship to sometimes get more enthusiastic in the crying to sort of urge mom along. And they discover sometimes that that actually works. And so a baby, very young, even before the age of being able to articulate or talk, is already discovering connections between events in their sequence that indicate some form and some concept of causality, that something leads to something else. And developmental psychologists, for example, when they look at this, they have discovered that there are three basic causalities that we can usually divide the events as they occur in sequence. And that is this, that one of those causalities is that I seem to be able to make things happen. I cause them. So I can do things and make them happen. And there you go. And another aspect of causality that we learn very early on is there's somebody else around here and they're doing things. And because they're doing things, that makes things happen. And so there's this recognition that, well, things are happening and somebody else is making them happen. Somebody or something else is making it happen. And then there's the other causality relationship that we discover. And it's usually discovered later, but it's also the causality of, well, things are happening and something must be causing them, but I have no idea what. I don't know. I don't know if it's me. I don't know if it's somebody else, or even if it's just random and just happening. And what happens to most people as they grow up, as children, is they tend to pick one of those causal relationships and they make it their default. And by making it their default, this in some ways kind of skews their personality in that direction. For example, one might take on this concept of the causality that I do things and it happens. And this might become for them their default causal explanation. That is, that although they realize that sometimes they cause things, sometimes other people cause things, and sometimes things are caused by things they don't know, although all people do grow up and mature enough to realize that all three of these causal relationships exist, all people tend to develop a default. That is, they believe this is the cause until proven otherwise. So some people believe I'm the one who makes things happen, and they'll believe that until they discover something that proves that the cause is elsewhere. These people tend to become movers and shakers. They tend to become people who do. They tend to be go-getters because they are motivated to do a lot of things because they realize the things that happen are the direct result of what they're doing. And they tend to become very leadership involved. And so this is part of their perhaps even extrovert personality, not necessarily extrovert in terms of their socialization, but certainly extrovert in their relationship to the world. They are go-getters. They are proactive. Other people, when they grow up, their default sense of causality is, well, other people make things happen. And that's their default view until they see otherwise. So that if something happens to them by chance, they're wondering, who did this to me? Or if there's something they need to do and they're not doing it, and therefore something falls apart, they're wondering, well, who the hell didn't do what they're supposed to be doing? And it's not ever them. Their concept of causality is external. And as a result, they tend to, by default, become very passive people because they're really expecting the rest of the world to behave the way it's supposed to and to do the things that it's supposed to do and make sure the doors they need to go through are open and available and this and that. And these people tend to be far more passive. And they will and can grow up to the point where they realize there are some things they really do have to take responsibility for, but they really have to kind of learn that is the case instead of being just, passive about it. I got a comment here, so let's see what we did get as a comment. Let's see. Oh, it's also getting in my way there. You're so bright that somebody that okay, no, that was from before. Okay, viewer comment. Bob's on fire. Oh, I'm trying. Sure, thanks. Anyhow. Where was I before I kind of burned out there? No, we're talking about causality and the relationship that we have. And some people come to the default position that, oh, things happen, but who the hell knows why? It's just very random and very chance. And with this relationship to causality, if that becomes a person's default, this sometimes becomes a very serious personality conflict and problem, because these are people who really won't do what they need to do until you finally prove to them that, this is something you need to be doing. And they don't even really blame others. They're kind of people who feel like, hey, it's just the way it is. It's in the dice. It's the way it goes. You die when you die. You live when you live. You're going to find a good job if you find a good job, and you're going to get promoted if you get promoted, and if you don't, you don't. And it's just the way it is. It's in the fates. It's just who knows, and these are people who don't. If they get sick, for example. They don't do much to take care of themselves, but they don't really expect the doctor to be able to do anything to take care of them either, and so they just kind of let it go, and we'll see what happens with this, and so, but the point I'm making is this: that each of us, as we develop, tend to develop a causality in our personality where we have a default causality. We either tend to, the first thing that occurs to us is, I'm in control here. Or the first thing it controls is who's in control here? What's or the default thought is, well, who the hell knows what's going on here? And these different personality attributes of where we tend to default with causality is just one of the three areas we can fall into. But it's usually best if we learn to grow up and mature and realize that when things are happening, that they're happening for one of these three reasons. And that's why there's always a good opportunity to kind of avoid the urgencies of needing to respond immediately to most things, respond immediately only to emergencies, and only to things that are both urgent and important. If they're not urgent and important and they're urgent, just let them go. Let them be urgent, but you're not going to do anything. Learning to manage your affairs so that I can now respond to the circumstances and situations that are happening by a true and more reliable sense of, where the causality is. And this is a person who's equally open to the possibility that I cause things, the possibility that somebody else is causing this, and the possibility that, well, this is being caused, but we don't know by what. It could be totally random or being caused by an unknown thing. And that's a maturity that we can grow into. But we tend to, all of us, as we develop as children, discover these three causalities and then pick our favorite and use that as our default until somehow we can be dragged to one of the other two in any given circumstance by overwhelming proof. As we grow more mature, we come to be able to look at all three and say, well, which one? I'd say that as we grow up and mature even more, we come to the point where we realize that in everything that happens, I play a role, other people play a role, and there are roles being played by forces that are unknown, and that all of these things mix together in a way that where I can discover that if I'm going to be a proactive person, I don't have to believe that I'm in control of everything. I don't have to be in control of everything. I can find that those things that I am responsible for and honestly in control of will be sufficient for me to make the difference that comes in my own life. And so this is a far more mature relationship with causality, as I understand it. And very few people really get to that point. The reason I'm talking about that is that very early on, we develop these awarenesses of causality, and very few people ever get beyond the default stage. They become aware of the other causalities, but they still stick to a default. And then these are the people who not only have default causalities, but they have a great deal of other default concepts in their own personal development. And then these are the people with all of these defaults that have never really fully matured are developing philosophies about how to do things, and developing standpoints and developing ways of doing it. And if they work hard at it, they can actually develop full-blown systems that are completely coherent and everything. That's wonderful that they can do that, but they need to do more. They need to realize that the way they've done it isn't the only way it can be done. Now, I mention all that to now get back to the topic that I wanted to begin with, and that is the concept of God, nationalism, and war. It's bad enough that we as human beings have these defaults within us that are perhaps not entirely mature and not as genuinely realistic and far more narrow-minded than we may be willing to admit. When we add God to the mix, now we not only have our narrow-mindedness, we now have a stubbornness. We now have not only a stubbornness, but a need to perhaps even obey the God who stands with me and the honesty with which I possess a coherent view of reality, which, if it's coherent to me, obviously this has to be God's view too. And so we end up with ourselves not perceiving ourselves being on the right side of our assessments. We come to now see ourselves as on the right side of the divine will. And I'll tell you something. It's a challenge to deal with somebody who honestly thinks that they are right for reasons that have to do with the assessments they have made and that they own as responsible assessments they themselves have made. It's difficult enough to deal with a person who's of a different opinion than you, who's approaching it that way. But how do you deal with the person who, in addition to that, believes that they are standing on the side of God when you're not God, and when you're saying something other than what they think God is saying, and therefore you're not only not of God, you've got to be of the one who opposes God, you know? So this adds an additional level of almost impossibility in dealing with it. In fact, I would say that in some sense, it's when you bring God into it. This is what causes violence to become so absolutely necessary. It's a shame, but it makes violence absolutely necessary. In fact, when I look at it, I look at some things like in the Bible. In the Bible, where it is stated that God has promised this land to Abraham. This land is to go to Abraham. It's to be his. It's to be his, and it's to be that which his children and his descendants will number more than the stars and occupy this land. If you're going to believe that that's what God is doing, if you want to believe that that's what God is doing in a particular moment, then you're going to be somebody who will probably justify almost anything that is done. Brings the land into their hands. And you're going to want to condemn almost anything that takes it away from them. And yet this is true, even though this same book that talks to us about God giving them the land shows in that same book that God takes them out of that land and deports them to Babylon. In the same book where Jesus promises them, you know, there's coming a day, they're going to destroy you, and they're going to tear this temple down. And the destruction of Jerusalem is something that a lot of people would believe was biblically foretold. And yet, these same people want to believe that anything that puts Israel into the hand of the Jews has got to be of God. This is a sad thing because, you know, a lot of people don't want to know their history. They don't want to know the facts. They just want to take, and Noam Chomsky talks about, you know, one of the unfortunate things is in America, we're not really well-informed people. Even those of us who pay attention to the news articles, listen to a wide variety of sources. Because you see, the truth is there's a lot going on in this world. And all you ever hear about is that which has been selected by others for you to hear. Now, it may be true that the stuff that's been selected for you by others comes from others who all have a different point of view and all come from a very different standpoint. But the truth is they're all bringing to you biased aspects. You don't have, until you gain the ability to do your own independent research, you do not have a view of the world and its events that is based upon your ability to understand it and comprehend it. You're dealing with only the stuff that they feed you. That's not good. That's not good at all, particularly when it leads to the kind of conclusions that we tend to fall in when we have to align ourselves along political parties. I mean, it's not good if you want to be a Republican and you don't take the view that most Republicans are taking. You know, every party does allow people to vary away from the party line by a certain amount. You know, and or if you're a Democrat, you're going to find yourself having to fall in line with their standpoint. And again, we're dealing here with what I call these monoaxial points of view that may be in some ways very, very coherent and very, very meaningful, but they're not the only valid way of looking at things. And then we add God to the equation. And what do we have? War. War is what we have. We live in a day where war has become so antiseptic that we don't really think of it And in fact, I remember it was so astounding back in the original Gulf War when Saddam Hussein had set all those oil wells on fire. We saw so much of that war on TV. We go to work and you take a lunch break. You might go into the break room and there might be a TV set on there, and you're watching the action going on in Kuwait as it's happening. There it is. It's right in front of us, and yet when lunch is over, you go back to work, and the war is something that's going on no more real in some ways than a video game, and it becomes no more real than a video game to you until somebody in your family or somebody you know well has a son or a daughter that dies and is brought home in a box. Then you begin to realize this isn't really a video game. Now, another thing that makes it very difficult to talk about the dangers, and it's the first time I'm talking about it as dangerous, of God, war, and the military, is that when you criticize it, chances are you're going to be heard as just another one of those monoaxial voices. It's very difficult to bring a criticism of this from a multi-axial point of view, because you're going to be criticizing it in a way where you can I completely empathize with and agree with many of the people whose opinion I'm going to disagree with. I understand a lot of the validity of their points. I accept them and I empathize with them, and I feel that you've got some real significant points here. And I'm not trying to say you're just an idiot and completely wrong. I'm not saying that. But when I have to say things that oppose that, it can be very easily heard as somebody who's just coming from that completely other extreme, when I'm not. Although I'll tell you, those people over there that you consider to be on that complete other extreme, I can also perceive a great deal of what they say is very valid. This is insanity. This is people getting their monoaxialism in the way. This is people, in my opinion, refusing to grow up, and they're playing grown-ups, making huge decisions. And this isn't just us as Americans. This is also Assad. This is also these other people. They are nothing but little kids playing grown-up with big toys. And it is disgusting. It is violent, and it is immature. It is stupid. It is senseless. And it is terribly unfortunate. And unfortunately, they're not the ones who always pay the big price. It is interesting to me how in our country sometimes we have people who refuse to be honest about the difference between honoring what the soldier does and honoring the military as an institution. I really don't think it's possible for any sovereign country to exist and remain safe without a military. You need a military. It's absolutely essential. If without it, you're a sitting duck. And so I don't have any philosophical problem with the need of a military. I have no problem with philosophically with the need of a military to be well trained and equipped sufficiently so as to be able to do the job in a manner that can be reasonably guaranteed to be successful in defending the country. And I do believe also that in a military situation, it is absolutely essential in order for that military organization to work that there be a hierarchy of command, and that the people on the lower end of that hierarchy need to be people who can accept orders and do what they're told to do, so long as that is their job and that is their duty and responsibility within their rank to be doing. And that they are called to do this, and they need to realize that the orders they are given are being given by people who may know things that are not privileged information to those down the chain of command. And therefore, they can't always know what the reasons are or the purposes. Sometimes they go out on a mission, they have no clue if they are the main mission or really a distraction to some other mission that will be the main mission. It is vitally important that these people not be involved in the knowledge of what the overall strategy is, because that's part of how the strategy works. It is done in the brain, not just on the ground. And so I have no problem understanding the concept of military, the concept of military hierarchy, nor, and I'll tell you, because of that, I think it is an astoundingly amazing thing when we have young people who are willing to sign up for the military and be available to put themselves in harm's way so that we might have that protection. That is an astounding thing that they are willing to do, and they are, in every aspect, as far as I can understand, heroes in every sense of the term. However, simply because that may be true, this does not mean that the people making the decisions to go to war are necessarily making these decisions as well thought out decisions. And if you are a civilian and not in the military, you do have the right and the responsibility to inquire, to criticize, to inspect, to bring up the tough questions, and to wonder if this is really the thing that ought to be done. And it's important that there be a dialogue and an openness to it. And that openness, that dialogue is cowardly categorized as being non-nationalistic or not being proud of America or being anti-American. No, we have a responsibility to think these things through. And we have a responsibility to struggle with them so that we make the decision. After all, if we really do need a military, we want to make sure that we're using them when necessary and not when not necessary. And we also need to realize that if we're having a military for the purpose of national defense, I think it is a difficult thing for us to realize, we don't exist to use our military to turn the whole rest of the world into a constitutional republic. That's not our job. People are responsible for their own form of government to a certain degree. And if we really want the rest of the world to have our form of government, then let's have our form of government in a way that we do it so well, they just want to be like us automatically, and inspires them. We got another viewer comment here. So let me see what we have. Viewer comment. Is it possible to have a strong country without patriotism? Well, I suppose that depends entirely on how you define patriotism. I would consider myself to be a patriot, but I'm sure there are a lot of people who would consider me as someone who's the last person on earth who ought to be called a patriot. So it all depends on how you define it. I do think that there is a sense in which, I am me, I'm not you. And because I'm me and not you, I have certain responsibilities to be me. And I have no responsibilities to be you. And therefore, there is a certain sense in which I have to be concerned with who I am and what my issues are and what my responsibilities are and what my circumstances are. And so there is a sense in which, just from a natural standpoint and from a responsible standpoint, many of the issues that concern me are more important to me than the issues that concern you might be important to you. I think that it is vitally important, however, that I be aware of the fact that the issues that are important to you are and should be just as important to you as the issues important to me are important to me. I don't feel that I need to somehow zero out your existence just because my existence is important to me. So I do see that, just personally being me represents to me an experience and a responsibility that is a little different than my responsibility toward you. The same thing goes to my family, my spouse, my children, my home, those things that are under my responsible ownership. I have to make decisions concerning these things. I don't get to decide when my neighbor mows his lawn and things like that. I have to make the decision when I should mow my lawn. And as my wife can tell you, I have not been making that decision lately. We've had a couple of days of rain. I need to get out there and mow this lawn. And I'm hoping to get out there perhaps even early tomorrow morning if I can. But I wanted to do it Saturday, and it started raining, and then today it didn't happen. But anyway, so these are decisions that I need to make. And what I'm getting at is that, and so then I have my neighborhood, and I have so there's areas of influence and responsibility and connection that I have. And I think that part of this is the nation in which I live. And there's a sense in which I think that patriotism in that context, that, I am an American, I'm not a Canadian. I have to deal with American issues. I don't really have to deal with Canadian issues necessarily. And so there is a sense in which my concerns, my interests, and my desires for the well-being of America represent a responsibility that I really have as a citizen. And I need to accept and own that, I think, in a certain way. It's part of, I see, the social contract that we have just simply living here, And I didn't invent that social contract. I was kind of born into it and discovered that it had already conscripted me. But nonetheless, it is, if you want to, the human species has to exist in some sort of societal manner. This is the one that we've got going. So I don't see a problem with patriotism per se, depending on how you define it. In fact, I think there can even be something wrong with people who just feel like, well, I don't care about it. Yeah, just let the I don't even vote. I don't do this. I don't do that. I don't know that I don't blame them. I can understand the apathy. Particularly, oftentimes, some of the most apathetic people are people who used to care and discovered they couldn't make a difference, which is unfortunate and sad. But anyway, getting back to the other aspect. Thanks for that statement, though. I think it was a very good question. So it really depends on how you define patriotism, I suppose. When we put God into the mix of the military and of the nationality stuff, I think we're beginning to create a problem that is more likely to end up in war. Now, a lot of people believe that religion causes wars. I'm not of that opinion. I don't believe that religion causes wars. I think people cause wars. And I think that religion is a convenient excuse that we use to justify the wars we otherwise can't justify. And I believe that people who are not religious, they tend to find other reasons for justifying the wars they want to have. And it's just that religion is a very easy and convenient target. And I'm not saying this to defend religion either. I'm not really that fond, you ought to know, of religion. But I really don't see religion as causing wars. In fact, to be honest with you, I think we need to truly recognize that all the things that human beings do are things that human beings do as human beings, period. And in fact, there's a way in which we need to accept the responsibility for that before we can, start the blaming things like religion or ignorance or stupidity or lack of education or poverty. Although these things definitely play a role and are very influential, I think that it's not until we really accept responsibility that we choose our actions based on the things we choose to validate as useful information to justify our actions. There's a sense in which we need to ultimately own the responsibility for the choices and decisions that we make, and that God becomes, in some ways, a shortcut. God becomes, in some ways, a failure to take that responsibility. And I don't want, as much as I am a theist, I don't want that kind of faith. I don't want to believe in that kind of a God. I really think I need to take responsibility for the political, economic, and military decisions that I myself would ever be a part of, or have a voice in assessing. I think that we're kind of lost here. I really think in our country, we're lost. We're lost in a tug-of-war of narrow-minded people. One narrow mind fighting against another narrow mind, both of them having something useful to say, neither of them really respecting the other. I think we are seeing a situation going on in other countries where we don't have a clue what these conflicts are about, what causes them. And I really believe that most Americans have no clue how previous American policies that you don't even know about have played a role in setting the stage and the context in which a lot of these conflicts are taking place, and other Western powers. I don't think we really understand what we're getting into. And I think it's time for us to get God out of these equations. I think it's time for us to start becoming far more multi-axial. I don't think we can afford to not be. I don't think we can survive as a species with this stupidity going on. I don't think we're willing yet to face the absurdity and the immaturity of this kind of violence, and the fact that the war to end all wars. What a phrase that was. How many people really believed it? Strange, the only war to end all wars that anyone could ever fight is the one that goes on inside of themselves. Anyhow, I think this is a very dangerous mix for us to allow ourselves to take on. I think we do need to empathize with and understand the variety of standpoints that are coming at in various different conflicts. I think we sometimes need to also accept the strange things that can be going on all sides of conflict. Uh, Something I never thought I'd ever hear myself say. Glenn Beck had a show here recently. I used to watch Glenn Beck every day. I did that for a little over a year. I didn't care for the guy, but I would watch him to see what he was saying, and I try to watch a lot of people, many people who I don't agree with, just to find out what's going on. And I never thought I'd ever say that I agreed with Glenn Beck, but Glenn Beck had a statement that he made. You can find it, I think, on YouTube, where he was astounded at what it is we're about ready to do. He was even very critical of Republicans who might want to move forward on this, saying that, this situation that we're talking about in Syria is a situation that is just full of a wide variety of people on either side we don't really want to necessarily be associated with. And this is a lose-lose proposition. He even suggested it's possible we need to just recognize that we need to let these people fight it out among themselves, because the radical immaturity on both sides of this conflict and the amount of information you're being fed is not true. A lot of the stuff you're being fed as far as information in this is one-sided and only half the story. You're not hearing everything. You're just hearing that which has been chosen to inflame you, to make you want to champion the decisions that various different forces or influences want to be able to make you feel good about. I remember one time studying military strategy. I didn't want to. They wanted me to, and I started looking at it. When I was in the Army, they wanted me to become a strategist because I'd take some tests, and I said, you don't understand. I'm a conscientious objector, and you want me to become a military strategist? But I'd already been exempted from boot camp. But and I got my honorable discharge, I guess. But anyway, one of the things that you see that is key to military strategy is that sometimes military strategy comes up with an effective way of dealing with a situation, dealing with an enemy, dealing with a potential enemy. But they realize that acting on that strategy would be reprehensible to the people. So what you need to do is you need to organize or provoke an event and take advantage of that event when it's provoked to cause people to react to it and finally be in favor of. I realized that was a powerful idea, but as I grew up, I never thought that I would actually see that in action because it struck me as being so dishonest. But there are times, I tell you, when things happen that I have to wonder if that's what's going on. And I had a sister who was actually in the CIA, who she was very good at not talking about anything, but there was a few times when she spoke about being disturbed about things going around the rumor mill, although she wasn't very specific. And it just, you put these things together and you begin to wonder what might be going on. I don't know. But, when you want to then take God and mix him into this and deal with a bunch of people who are monoaxial, a bunch of people who have only one side of the story and a cause and a philosophy to champion and a God who they think is on their side. This is a dangerous mix. This is a mix for people who are too immature to be making the decisions that are their responsibility to make. And when are we going to be honest about this? It is insane. It is stupid. And it is a very, very critical thing. By the way, that doesn't mean that we can just all walk away from it either, because these insane people, if you stop the insanity, that's only one person. You still have to deal with the people who haven't stopped the insanity, and that's not an easy thing. I don't think I have all the answers here. I don't know if any of us do, but we have to realize we're dealing with a situation that is far more complex than a lot of people are willing to be honest about, and they're all too gung-ho to solve the problem one way or another. I think it's very unfortunate, and I think there'll be a great deal of suffering we have not calculated and that will end up proving to have been totally unnecessary. Love has no sanctions, in a sense, where if people won't love, you just go without love. And that doesn't sound like a horrible consequence. But trust me when I tell you, going without love is the root of all consequences that we can't afford. It really is. Anyhow, that's all I have to say tonight. Bob Greaves, the Unconventional Pastor. Well, we'll see you later. And tonight, stay tuned. We've got a pretty good show going on in the place. Joey might tell you a little bit more about it right now. Thank you. Good night.
Ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned. In just a moment on the Florida NCG studio stage, Dr. Michael W. Jones and Rhonda are going to be on stage with our panelists and our hosts. It's going to be a full night. We've got two guests, Dr. John Shook and Colin Pearson, and Bob Greaves and Greg Bray and Christopher Mowdy and Dr. Jones and Rhonda and Bob Greaves and Bob Greaves. It's going to be an amazing evening, so stay tuned.